The screeching of tires and the blaring of horns woke me up. I jolted out of my bed, heart pounding, and rushed to the window. The scene outside was chaotic. A sleek, black Cadillac had crashed into a lamppost, just a few yards away from our hotel in Houston. People were gathering, and a few were already on their phones calling for help, but my mind was elsewhere. My eyes darted to the driver's side, and I saw him, a figure slumped over the steering wheel. My heart sank. I didn't need to see his face to know it was Elvis. I ran out of the hotel room, heart racing, and pushed through the crowd. The doorman, who had been standing next to the car earlier, was now on the ground, shaking his head in disbelief. I reached the car and pulled open the driver's door. Elvis was unconscious, his head bleeding. I screamed for help, and someone called an ambulance. But as I held his hand, I felt a warmth in his palm. He squeezed back ever so slightly. He was alive. The ambulance arrived, and the paramedics rushed to get him out of the car. I followed them, tears streaming down my face. They loaded him onto a stretcher and into the ambulance. I climbed in beside him, holding his hand, praying he would be okay. The ride to the hospital was a blur. The lights, the sirens, the beeping of machines, it all seemed surreal. When we arrived, the doctors and nurses took over. They rushed him into the emergency room, and I was left waiting in the hallway, alone and scared. I sat there, thinking back to just a few hours earlier, when everything had been perfect. Elvis had called the hotel garage and requested his Eldorado be brought to the front with the top down. The doorman was standing next to the car, waiting to hand him the keys. We had driven away, and I turned to look back at the hotel. We were both a little sad because yesterday was gone. Elvis was busy driving through the heavy traffic, and I was sitting on my side of the car, watching him, wondering what he was thinking. When we reached the highway that would take us across Texas and back to Tennessee, he looked back at the Houston skyline and smiled. "It was fun, wasn't it, baby? Why are you so quiet, June? And why are you sitting way over there? Come over here and sit next to me," he said, his voice sounding a little sad. He patted the seat next to him. I quickly slid over. "Now, ain't that better? My whittle bitty girl looks sad. What's on your mind, baby?" "I just wish we didn't have to go back. Not yet, anyway." "Me too, baby. I wish I could make time stand still." We drove through the farmland, admiring the vast openness. Elvis exclaimed, "This is the way to live," and I had to agree. We talked about buying a ranch, raising horses and cows, and having a house full of kids. It all seemed so real, so possible. We stopped at a service station, and I ran to the restroom. The station had only one restroom, with a big sign on the door saying white only. Elvis knocked on the door, asking if I wanted a Coke. When I opened the door, he handed me the Cokes and ran in as fast as he could. The station attendant had called the local fans, and soon a motorcade of trucks and cars was following us. Further down the road, we found a beautiful pond. We climbed through the fence and walked to the water's edge. Under a stately oak tree, Elvis asked me to be his girl. I said yes, and we talked about our future. But now, as I waited in the hospital, all those dreams seemed fragile, like they could shatter at any moment. The waiting room was quiet, except for the occasional sound of a doctor or nurse rushing by. I held onto the hope that Elvis would be okay. I thought about the last few days, about how much he meant to me. I couldn't imagine my life without him. I looked at my watch. It had been over an hour. The doctors hadn't come out to give me any news. My mind raced with worst-case scenarios, but I tried to push them away. I needed to stay strong for both of us. Finally, a doctor emerged from the emergency room. He walked over to me, his face grave. I stood up, heart pounding. "How is he?" I asked, my voice trembling. The doctor took a deep breath. "He's stable, but he has a concussion and a few cuts and bruises. He'll need to stay overnight for observation, but he should be fine." I let out a sigh of relief, feeling the weight of the world lift off my shoulders. "Can I see him?" The doctor nodded. "Follow me." I followed him down the hallway, my heart still racing. When we reached Elvis's room, I stepped inside. He was lying in the bed, his face pale but peaceful. I sat down next to him, taking his hand in mine. "Elvis," I whispered, "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." He stirred, his eyes fluttering open. When he saw me, he smiled weakly. "June," he murmured. I was so scared. I leaned in and kissed his forehead. "You're safe now. I'm here and I'm not leaving." He squeezed my hand. "I love you, Juanico. I love you too, Elvis Presley." We sat there in the quiet room, holding hands, as the world outside seemed to fade away. For a moment it was just us, and everything felt right again. The next day, Pat and I drove to the Sun and Sand to meet Elvis and the boys for breakfast. The Coco restaurant and lounge, right across the street, was famous for its seafood, but that morning Elvis and his friends ordered something different. The waiter raised an eyebrow when he saw the order for hard-fried eggs and burned bacon, but he didn't say a word. Elvis rarely carried money, so he asked Arthur to handle the minor details like paying the bill. After breakfast, we strolled back to the motel. The swimming pool was empty, and Elvis suggested we go for a swim. Red, Elvis, and I were the only ones in the water. The others were lounging by the pool, still full from the big breakfast. We had been swimming for less than 30 minutes when the parking lot started filling up. Cars pulled in, and people began to gather by the pool. Elvis quickly realized what was happening and called for Arthur to get the car. We hurried out of the pool, wrapped ourselves in towels, and made a run for the car. By the time we got back to the room, Elvis was feeling trapped. "Maybe if I go out and talk to them, they'll go home," he said, pacing back and forth. He changed into a clean shirt and carefully applied some eye makeup. He wanted to look his best. I recognized a few friends in the crowd, including Sal Taranto, who was standing in the back. Sal called everyone baby, and when he saw me, he shouted, "Hey June, where you at, baby?" Elvis gave me a look, and I waved to Sal, explaining that he was just a friend. Elvis went outside and talked to the fans, signed a few autographs, and then we went back inside. A reporter from the Daily Herald knocked on the door, and Elvis gave an interview, reminding everyone that he was only in town for one night before heading to Florida. But he was tired of being cooped up, so he suggested we go to Pontchartrain Beach in New Orleans. Pontchartrain Beach was a huge amusement park with a giant roller coaster called the Zephyr. We rode it so many times I lost count. Elvis loved it, and we had a blast. After the roller coaster, we tried the bumper cars. Everyone wanted to get a shot at Elvis, and we laughed so hard my face hurt. But the ride ended too soon, and we had to give the leftover tickets to a group of young boys waiting in line. We grabbed some food at the Terrace, an open-air restaurant on the Midway. The manager, Mr. Batts, came over and offered to open the park for Elvis and his friends after hours if the crowds got too much. We all ordered cheeseburgers and fries, and Elvis added a platter of sliced tomatoes and pickles. While we ate, fans kept asking for autographs, even when Elvis had a mouthful of food. I was getting frustrated, but Elvis stayed calm and polite. After dinner, we took a ride on the Ferris wheel. From the top, Elvis pointed out the outdoor theater where he had performed with my friend Anne Rave, back in 1955. Anne, known as Martha Ann Barhanovich, had a husky voice like Brenda Lee. It turned out that her father, Yankee, had arranged Elvis's first appearance in Biloxi. As we rode the Ferris wheel, I felt a sense of peace. Despite the chaos and the crowds, we were having a great time. Elvis was just a guy enjoying himself, and for a moment, it felt like we were the only two people in the world. Elvis had been in town for 2 days when the phone calls started. Reporters from all over were calling, wanting to know all about Elvis and me. They asked silly questions, like if Elvis had kissed me good night by the garden gate. It didn't matter what I said. They wrote whatever they wanted. One day, we were driving down the beach with the radio blaring. The DJ on my favorite station, No in New Orleans, announced that he was going to try to interview Elvis's girlfriend Liv on the phone. He said there was a rumor that we were engaged to be married. The next song was, I Want You, I Need You, I Love You. Elvis turned down the volume and said, "Oh shit, if the Colonel hears this, I'm dead. Where's this DJ coming from, June?" I thought he was asking if I knew the DJ, but he just wanted to know which city. "It's in New Orleans," I told him. "Well, if this guy wants an interview, let's give him one," Elvis said, making a U-turn and heading west. 90 minutes later, we were in New Orleans. Elvis parked the car right in front of the St. Charles Hotel, where the radio station was. He said, "The hell with it, let him give me a ticket." We rode the elevator up to the radio station. Elvis stood in his Elvis position, arms folded, and we filled the window. The DJ saw me first, then read, and when he saw Elvis, he almost fainted. He stopped the music and announced to his listeners that Elvis Presley was right there in the studio with him. He was super excited when he found out Elvis always listened to W.No. when he was on the Gulf Coast. He said he'd put a stop to the rumors. "Wait, they're just rumors, not ugly ones. I think they're kinda cute," I said, laughing. The DJ said, "You must be June, you're a real beauty. I can see why Elvis likes you so much." He held up 2 fingers on each hand when he said likes. I blushed and smiled. He did a live interview with Elvis, and made one on tape for later. Elvis denied the engagement rumors, and he was nervous, stuttering a little. He was worried about his manager, Colonel Tom Parker. I hadn't met the man, but I already didn't like him. Fans started gathering outside the station. One reporter said the St. Charles Hotel was so full of fans that when one girl fainted, she had to walk 2 blocks to fall down. Elvis signed a few autographs, and we got back in the car, still double parked. We had to push through the screaming fans to get away. "Phew, I'm glad that's taken care of," Elvis said, still nervous about the interview. The DJ kept playing Elvis's songs, talking about his famous visitor. He even pronounced my name right and complimented Elvis's taste in women. Elvis's long fingers dangled from the top of the steering wheel as he listened to the taped announcement. "Hi, this is Elvis Presley, and you're listening to my favorite radio station, W.No. in New Orleans." "Damn, I sound like a hick," he said, hitting the steering wheel. "No, you don't. You sound wonderful," I said, trying to calm him down. Elvis drove aimlessly toward home. When we reached Chef Mentor Highway, he smiled and said, "Now that we're here, we might as well go to Pontchartrain Beach." My mom was always worried about me because I never knew where I'd be. How could I tell her? Mr. Batts, the park manager, knew we were back and invited us to eat. This time it was his treat. Elvis ordered fried chicken, and I ordered soft shell crabs. Elvis was finishing his last piece when the waitress brought another half chicken and another crab for me. I'd already eaten 2 and couldn't eat another bite, but Red and Jean finished them off. They loved the crabs. The Times-Picayune reported the next day that Elvis had eaten 3 halves of fried chicken, and I had eaten 3 soft shell crabs. It made us sound like we were pigs. Mr. Batts made sure we weren't disturbed during our meal. We were having coffee when he brought some friends to meet Elvis. One I remember was Ralph Dupas, a professional fighter. He was handsome and well-built. Elvis joked that he could take him, and they posed for pictures. The local people loved it. We ran into a local girl named Gail Higgins and her friends. Gail had bleached blonde hair and was very attractive. She complained that she spent her summer studying art in the French Quarter, but would rather be having fun. We invited her to join us, and we stayed until the park closed at midnight. She then invited us to her house for a drink. "It's too early to go home. My parents are out of town, so we'll have the place to ourselves," she said. We followed her to a mansion in the Garden District. The houses there were beautiful, with wide porches and big rooms. I had only seen places like this in magazines. Gail seemed unaffected by her family's wealth. We stayed for a while, exchanged phone numbers, and promised to stay in touch. By the time we got back to Biloxi, Elvis and I were exhausted. The next morning, Elvis had a message at the hotel. Mr. Bellman had arranged a deep-sea fishing trip. We were to be at the dock at 7. My hair was still damp and in pin curls, and I met Pat at Coco Restaurant for breakfast before the boat trip. I walked in, sleepy-eyed, with a red bandana around my head. Elvis pretended not to know me. "Aunt Jemima, you can sit next to me if you like," he said, pulling out my chair. "Puts me in the mood for a pancake or 2, Jean mumbled. The waitress came to take our order. Elvis always had trouble deciding, but ended up ordering the same thing. "Tell the chef I'll have my bacon and eggs the exact same way I had them yesterday," he said. "And how was that, sir? I wasn't here yesterday, and I don't think the chef was either," the waitress said sarcastically. "I'll have 2 eggs fried hard, and I'd like my bacon burned, please," Elvis said, smiling. She gave him a disbelieving look, but took the order. When she brought the food, everyone got what they ordered except Elvis. His eggs were sunny side up, and his bacon was limp. The waitress smirked, trying to show she wasn't impressed. "I can't eat this," Elvis said politely. "Do you think you're supposed to get special treatment just because you're Elvis Presley?" she asked, glaring at him. "No, ma'am, I'd like to be treated just like a regular customer." Elvis said, standing up. He picked up his plate, tilted it, and let the eggs splatter at her feet. He told Arthur to pay the check and leave a tip. Maybe she'll use it to buy a book on good manners, he said, putting his plate back on the table. We weren't staying, so Pat started putting all the toast in a napkin. Leave it, we'll eat somewhere else, Elvis told her. But Elle, we don't have time. We have to be at the boat in 20 minutes, Pat pleaded. Arthur paid the check, and Red followed Pat's lead, putting all the ham and bacon in a napkin. We divided the food and had sandwiches on the way to the boat. That stupid bitch, Jean mumbled between bites. A small group was at Barisev's pier to see us off. Eddie Bellman handed Elvis a bag of warm glazed donuts. We forgot about the restaurant and stuffed our faces with donuts before the boat left the dock. Captain Thornton shook hands with Elvis. Watching us eat, he said, I hope we have enough food. You know we have Arthur with us. The best way to prevent seasickness is to keep your stomach full at all times. I wanted to make sure we had enough, Eddie said, showing us an ice chest full of food. About 10 miles out, we dropped the lines to troll. The heavy rods and reels used artificial bait, called spoons or spinners. When a fish hit, you yelled strike, and the captain slowed the boat. We had as many as 3 people fighting a fish at once. It was fast-paced and exciting. We caught a lot of king mackerel, bonitos, and jack crevalles, all weighing between 12 and 60 pounds. Elvis wanted to catch sharks, so Captain Thornton pulled up to a shrimp boat to get a bucket of chum. Shrimpers clean their nets and throw the trash fish back, and the seagulls follow the boat to eat them. You can trade a 6-pack of beer for a bucket of chum, but we didn't have any beer. Elvis only liked Barks root beer, and Eddie thought he was against alcohol, so he didn't buy any beer. Eddie ended up paying cash for the chum. The captain dropped anchor and hung the chum from the back of the boat. Soon, sharks of all sizes started coming. Elvis and Red did most of the fishing, and landed some impressive sharks. I watched from a safe distance, not wanting to get too close to all those razor-sharp teeth. Elvis and I had a blast during his visit to Biloxi. One day, we went on a fishing trip, and Elvis was so excited that he asked Mr. Bellman, Eddie, to arrange another one when his parents came to visit. My daddy loves to fish, Elvis said, beaming. Eddie was happy to help, and promised to set it up. When we got back to the dock that evening, Elvis's Cadillac was covered with girls' names, addresses, and love notes. It didn't seem to bother Elvis, but I was mortified. I couldn't believe this was happening in my hometown. But I soon learned that it happened everywhere he went. At the Sun and Sand Motel, a crowd was waiting to see Elvis. He was exhausted from the long day on the water, and just wanted to rest. I'd leave tonight if I knew where I could get some privacy, he sighed. The next morning, Eddie called and offered Elvis his vacant house on Porter Avenue. We packed up and moved in, but the crowd followed us. So Eddie called Gulf Hills, Dude Ranch and Country Club to see if they had a vacant villa. Elvis handed Eddie a note with a fake name, Arthur Hooton, Party of 5. We left Biloxi, making the crowd think he was heading to Florida. Gulf Hills was perfect. It was quiet and peaceful, and we usually had the hotel dining room, lounge, and swimming pool to ourselves. The winding roads around the hotel made it hard for fans to find us. Elvis felt like he had his privacy back. He was free to do as he pleased. The hotel social director came with a list of activities. Golf was at the top, but Elvis didn't play. Horseback riding and water skiing caught our attention. Our villa was right by Fort Bayou. One evening, Elvis and I went for a walk along the bayou and watched the sunset from the hotel pier. "Do you like to ski, baby?" he asked, excited. I told him I had never tried. "You've been raised on the water and never been on water skis. You've got to be kidding," he said. I admitted I had never had the chance. He promised to get me lessons and said I'd love it. I was a bit nervous, but he had only been skiing for a few months, so I figured I could do it too. We sat and watched the sky turn dark. It was so dark we had to feel our way back to the villa, laughing all the way. Back at the villa, the guys were smoking cigars and drinking root beer. The place smelled awful, and Elvis told them to open the windows. He grabbed my hand and we ran outside. We drove down the beach, and some cars started honking. Elvis put the convertible top up. but it only made things worse with all the names and phone numbers written on it. We parked in an alley behind my house, and Elvis didn't recognize it until I pointed to the garage apartment. My mom saw the headlights and came to check. She invited us in for a piece of warm banana cake and a glass of cold milk. She had been reading all about Elvis and had a lot of questions. She seemed to know more about his life than I did. Elvis was a good sport and answered her questions. When she excused herself to take a bath, Elvis said he was leaving too. He thanked her for the cake and ran his finger along the plate for one last taste of the chocolate icing. I walked him to his car, gave him a sweet chocolate-tasting goodnight kiss, and watched him drive away, blinking his headlights 3 times. I smiled, knowing he was using the lights to say, "I love you." The next morning, Pat and I arrived at the villa at 10. Elvis and the guys were ready to go horseback riding. "You're not going dressed like that, are you, June?" Elvis asked. I ran to the car to change into long pants and loafers. Arthur was still in the bathroom, so we waited. The road to the stable was muddy, but the horses were ready. Elvis didn't like the idea of a guide, but we needed one to avoid getting lost. We left in a single file, and soon we were cantering and getting mud on each other. Elvis started singing, and we all joined in. The trail through the woods was dry, and we swayed to the sound of the leather saddles. We sang Gene Autry's "Back in the Saddle Again" and "Let the Rest of the World Go By." I sang harmony, and we had a great time. The gang applauded when we finished, and we took a little bow. On the way back, we passed a fireworks stand, and Elvis made a quick U-turn. We bought 2 giant boxes of firecrackers and divided them into 2 stacks. We planned our strategy over lunch. I had fired Roman candles before, but never at another person. "I can picture the headlines now," I said, laughing. Elvis Presley's girl, and last seen running down the fairway, her long dark hair now a flaming red. It was all in fun, the rock and roll singer had assured her. Everyone laughed. We had 6 hours before dark, so we went swimming. Pat, Red, Elvis, and I had the pool to ourselves. We played King of the Mountain, and I got scratched by Pat's hard fingernails. I tried to teach Elvis to swim, but he did fine as long as his face was in the water. He promised to practice and be as good as me by next summer. When it got dark, we gathered our fireworks and headed to the golf course. We lit our cigars and started shooting Roman candles at each other. It was a bit chaotic, and we almost set the woods on fire, but no one was hurt. The next morning, the hotel manager sent a message saying the fireworks were beautiful, but hazardous. Elvis apologized and promised it wouldn't happen again. The next day, I was nervous about water skiing. Elvis was showing off, and I was getting lessons from Dickie Waters. I was nervous, but Dickie made me feel confident. The boat pulled away, and before I knew it, I was up and skiing. I made it around the bayou without falling, and my hair was still dry. When we got back to the dock, everyone was clapping except Elvis. He was quiet and didn't look at me. Dickie apologized for not teaching me how to stop, and for getting my hair wet. He told Elvis I was a natural, and would do great after a few more lessons. "We don't have time for any more lessons. We have to go," Elvis said, and he was quiet for the rest of the afternoon. We had supper at the hotel and then walked over to the hotel lounge, the Pink Pony. A small group of tourists were there, having a nightcap. We all ordered Cokes and gathered around the upright piano. We usually started with a sing-along, but most people were a little reluctant to sing with Elvis. They were happy just to sit and listen. He entertained us with all his favorites, including some boogie-woogie. We took turns playing the bongo drums. A hush fell over the room when Elvis ended the night with a spiritual song, sung with great feeling. We normally walked hand in hand, but on the way back to the villa that night, Elvis walked a few steps ahead of me. When we got there, Pat gathered her wet bathing suit and her car keys. It was past time for her to have her dad's car home. I grabbed my wet suit and my purse and went to kiss Elvis goodnight. "Where do you think you're going, June? It's not even 9 o'clock yet," he said, holding me around the waist. "I was going to save you a trip, Elvis," I said without showing any emotion. "I don't want you to save me a trip. I'll take you home later," he said, telling me what to do rather than asking. He took me by the arm and we walked Pat to her car, watching in silence until she was out of sight. Now that my only means of transportation was gone, He released my arm and stood silently for a few seconds. He took my hand and walked me through the villa, past the guys, and into his bedroom. Still acting a little strange, he let go of my hand and sat down on the side of the bed. "I want you next to me," he said, looking up at me. "Okay, Elvis, I'm here," I answered, sitting by his side. "That's not what I'm talking about, June," he said mysteriously. "Well, what are you talking about, Elvis? I can't read your mind. If something is bothering you, tell me, maybe I can help." Caring for Elvis the way I did, my normal assertive reaction was suddenly passive, a side of me I hadn't experienced before. "I don't know how to say what I'm trying to say," he began, still brooding. "Don't worry about how to say it, just say it. Tell me what's bothering you." "What's gonna happen to me, June? What's gonna happen to us? I keep thinking you don't care. You're never next to me when I need you. You're always off somewhere, talking to someone else. I'm constantly calling you to come by me. Whenever a crowd is around, you back off and stand on the outside. I'm always looking around to see where you are. I don't want to have to look for you, June. I want you next to me. Do you know what I'm trying to say?" "I understand what you're saying, but you always have people crowding around you. I don't want to crowd you too. I'm only trying to give you room to breathe. Other girls I've dated are always right next to me. They act like they're proud to be with me. If I say something, they listen. If I want to say something to you, I have to find you first." I knew exactly what he was talking about, and I felt a little guilty. But it had nothing to do with my feelings for Elvis. I had made up my mind not to compete with his fans for his attention. I would back away, letting him flirt or whatever with all the pretty girls constantly trying to get close to him. I promised myself I would never cramp his style. I knew he loved all the attention, and I wanted him to feel free to do or say anything he wanted. And even more than that, I didn't particularly care to see him smiling as he accepted a folded piece of paper with the name and phone number of some beauty queen, placing it in his top pocket, giving it a pat and saying, "It's right here next to my heart, honey." Jealousy, the green-eyed monster, could eat your heart out, and I wanted no part of it. So I was living by the old cliché, what you don't know can't hurt you. I'm not like your other girlfriends, Elvis. I'm not going to hang on your every word or hang all over you either. That's not who I am. When we first met, you said, "I like you, June, you're different." Now, all of a sudden, you want me to change and be like everybody else. Why? I don't want you to be like everybody else, June. I just want you next to me, not off talking to someone else. I want you to be mine. I am yours, my love, but I can't live in your shadow. I need room to breathe too. I'm sorry if you're not happy with the way I am, but I don't think that's the real problem. You've been in a bad mood ever since we left the ski dock this afternoon. Why don't you tell me what's really bothering you? Please, talk to me, Elvis. I love you. When we went water skiing today, you paid more attention to the ski instructor than you did to me. I wanted you to ride in the boat while I was skiing, but you were too busy taking lessons. I wanted you to watch me ski. I was watching you ski. Every time you passed the dock I waved, but you never even looked my way. I watched you until you were out of sight. I've never been on water skis before, and I was nervous. I was paying close attention to Dickie, so I could get it right. Dickie, you even know his name. Yes, I know his name. He's been the ski instructor at Gulf Hills for the past 2 summers. Have you ever been out with him? No, I've never been out with him. Okay, now I know what this is all about. You're wondering just how many guys have made out with me, and when one of them will show up to brag about it, right? I knew I'd hit the nail on the head when he didn't answer. Elvis, I told you when we first met that I've been out with lots of different guys, but I've never been serious about any of them. I've been waiting for the right one to come along, and believe it or not, you're it. I love you, Elvis Presley. You'd better love me, June Juanico, you better. He pulled me down on the bed and kissed me. Stay here with me tonight, June. I'll take you home first thing in the morning, he said between kisses. I can't stay all night, Elvis. My mother will be worried. No, she won't, June. She knows you're with me. She also knows I need to be home. Okay, baby. I'll take you home in a little while. Lying in his arms, I remembered a book I had received for a graduation present. The Prophet by Khalil Gibran always had a soothing effect on me. Maybe reading something other than the newspaper would do him good. It might even calm him down. I was confused by his new possessive attitude. All of a sudden, he wanted me under his thumb. He didn't seem to trust me anymore, if he ever had. My guess was, He'd been exposed to more than his share of loose women. He'd always shy away from this type, but some of his companions, his entourage, didn't. Getting a piece of ass in every different city was fast becoming the norm. Was he thinking that all females were the same? As soon as we pulled up in front of my house, I ran inside, grabbed the book, and brought it out to him. Here, read a little of this. It might make you see things a little differently. Who knows, it might even make you a little wiser, I said, leaning in the car, kissing him good night. June, I love you more than you'll ever know. I'll call you in the morning before I leave for Memphis. You're leaving in the morning. Are you coming back? I asked, crushed by the sudden news. I'll be back before you realize I'm gone, he said, reassuring me. And he was, too, driving a new car. He decided that the convertible, especially with the autographed top, was too noticeable for any privacy. The new car, a lavender Lincoln, was much more conservative and less likely to attract attention. Wearing a hat and sunglasses, I didn't realize it was Elvis parked in front of my house until he stepped out of the car. You must be making a shit sack full of money, I said, laughing and rubbing the smooth upholstery. I'm doing okay for a country boy, he said, leaning over to open the glove compartment and show me the copy of The Prophet. June, I love the book. Can I keep it? It's yours, my love. I knew you'd like it. I could tell by the way he was talking. He'd had a chance to do a little reading while he was gone. When we got to Gulf Hills, Elvis passed the villas and drove into the driveway of a 2-story house at the end of the road. How do you like it? He asked, grinning. I didn't realize he was talking about the house until I saw the boys walking out to meet us. I've rented it for the rest of the summer. I might even buy it later, who knows, he said, still grinning. The house was owned by a family named Hack, so the boys nicknamed it the Hack House. Elvis showed me around, saving his upstairs bedroom, which had a balcony overlooking the living room, for last. Not only was it private, it was also very romantic. Elvis's parents were supposed to arrive in Biloxi that night. I need to get in touch with Mr. Bellman, June. Do you know where I can find him? He said, anxious about his parents' arrival. No, but my mother is home. I'm sure she knows where he is. We drove to the back of my house and parked the Lincoln in the alley. Mama had the day off and was cooking red beans and rice. Hi, Mrs. Juanico, he said, inhaling the aroma. Sure smells good in here. Will you do me a favor? Will you get Mr. Bellman on the phone? I'd like to talk to him about taking my parents deep-sea fishing. Eddie's on his way over now to eat some red beans. Have you ever had red beans and rice, Elvis? Mama asked. No, ma'am, I can't say I have. When Eddie arrived, Elvis went to meet him at the door. Mr. Bellman, it's good to see you, sir. I've talked to my parents and they're all excited about going fishing. They'll be here tonight. Do you think you can arrange another trip? Eddie went straight to the phone and dialed, but got a busy signal. Dishing out a big plate of beans and smoked sausage, I suggested we eat now and call later. Elvis and Eddie dove into their plates. I've never tasted anything quite like this before, Mrs. Juanico. This is delicious. You'll have to teach my mother how to fix this when she gets here. May's a great cook, Elvis. That's why I'm over here so much. Eddie went back to the phone and got through to Captain Thornton. Will tomorrow morning be okay, Elvis? Yes, sir. What time should we be there? Same time, same place. I'll take care of everything else. Thanks, Mr. Bellman. I sure appreciate this. My parents are gonna love it, and I can't wait to do it again. It was the best time I've ever had. Elvis said, shaking Eddie's hand the entire time he was talking. Mr. and Mrs. Presley checked into the Sun and Sand Motel as soon as they arrived in Biloxi. They called my house and talked to Elvis. We were to pick them up at 6 a.m. the next morning. My mother even made arrangements to take the day off, something she had never done, to go fishing with us. She was anxious to meet the Presleys, too. My mother and the Presleys hit it off right from the start. Mama thought Vernon was one of the most handsome men she had ever seen. She told them that Elvis got his good looks from both his mother and his father. In her opinion, Elvis had his father's strong features and his mother's deep-set eyes. Mrs. Presley was complimenting Mama for raising such a fine daughter, and Mama was saying the same thing about Elvis being such a fine young man. By the end of the day, they were teasing us about having little blue-eyed grandbabies. Red, Vernon, Elvis, and I were the first ones to try our luck fishing. Sitting in chairs across the back of the boat, Elvis was showing his dad how to let the line out and set the drag. Elvis had only done it once before, but by this time he was doing it like a pro. Mrs. Presley busied herself making Elvis peanut butter and banana sandwiches. When he started catching fish and had to keep both hands on the rod, she held his sandwich for him, giving him a bite every now and then. Mama had made some deviled eggs, and the boys were eating them whole. I yelled, "Save one for me," and Elvis took one from the box and shoved the whole thing in my mouth. It wasn't long before Mr. Presley was letting his line out and setting the drag like a champ. He wasn't about to stop and eat. The deviled eggs were only an appetizer for Red, so when he got up to fix himself a sandwich, he gave his chair to Mrs. Presley. She didn't want to fish at first, but after pulling in a few, she was loving it too. In the beginning, we'd been catching bonitos, but then we got into a school of big jack crevalles. Mrs. Presley, relaxing between fish, her line still over, suddenly got a strike. The fishing line was resting on the side of her wrist. When the fish struck out, the line went zing, cutting her right across her arm and wrist. Sitting next to her, I saw the cut, still white, just before it started to bleed. The same thing had happened to me once before, and I remembered the burning pain. I took a rod and yelled for Elvis, who was standing only a few feet away. The big fish was taking the line out fast. I gave the rod and reel to Red and took Mrs. Presley to the captain's quarters to find the first aid kit. Elvis sat down on the bunk, next to his mother, and put his arms around her. I was on my knees, trying to be careful not to hurt her as I put on a bandage. When I finished, she kissed me on the top of the head. "Thank you, little Satinin, it'll be all better now," she said, trying to ignore the pain. The boat was rocking from side to side, and Mrs. Presley began looking a little pale. I told Elvis to take her outside in the fresh air, and I sat with her until she was feeling better. I remembered moaning and groaning when the same thing happened to me, but she never once complained. Red finally landed the big jackfish responsible for the accident. Elvis picked up the gaff, hooked in the 50-pound jack, and showed it to his mother. "Look at the size of this thing. There's no way you could have landed him by yourself, Mama." "I would have if he hadn't gotten me first. Just give me a minute, I'll get another one," she yelled, still looking a little pale. I asked her if she had eaten anything yet, but she said she wasn't hungry. I fixed her a sandwich and insisted she eat, telling her what Mr. Bellman had told us about keeping a full stomach on the water. Within 30 minutes, her color was back and she was fishing again. It took her a while, but she did manage to land another big one, and all by herself too. Elvis kept trying to help her, but she kept pushing him away. "If I'm strong enough to handle you, I can certainly handle this fish." We were at least 2 hours from shore by then, so at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the captain turned the boat and headed for the coast. We watched a school of porpoise swimming along with the boat. Even though everyone was tired and sunburned, it had been a great trip. We'd landed over 50 fish. About 5 miles from shore, another boat signaled us to stop. The captain, thinking they had engine trouble, pulled up next to them, and 2 members of the press jumped on board as their boat pulled away. Elvis was so mad about the intrusion he refused to talk to them. We stayed on the front of the boat, with Red and Arthur standing in each walkway, making sure they couldn't squeeze in. Elvis and I had just spent a wild day on the water, trying to shake off the fans who followed us down the coast. Mr. Bellman, or Eddie as Elvis insisted we call him, had been a lifesaver. He helped us get the Presleys to Gulf Hills without any trouble. After a busy day of water skiing and a surprise appearance at Eddie's shoe store, where Elvis signed autographs and got a new shotgun as a thank you, we all sat down for a quiet dinner, but the night took an unexpected turn. I was about to head home when the phone rang. It was B. Manuel, a family friend. Her daughter, Carol, was seriously ill with leukemia and was a huge Elvis fan. She had missed seeing him at the shoe store, and I had promised to call Mrs. Manuel the next time Elvis was in town. I invited them over, thinking it would be a small, kind gesture. Elvis was surprised, but immediately agreed to see them. When Carol and her mother arrived, the little girl was speechless. Her eyes were as big as saucers. Elvis greeted her with a warm smile, took her tiny hand, and sat down next to her. He started talking about the hound dog on the Steve Allen show, which Carol loved. She quickly opened up, and her nervousness faded. Elvis picked her up and placed her on his lap, singing her favorite song. I want you, I need you, I love you. Carol's eyes darted between Elvis and her hands, folded in her lap. Elvis lifted her chin gently, and she finally looked up and smiled. The moment was so touching that I felt a lump in my throat. Mrs. Manuel, her eyes filled with tears, whispered a thank you to Elvis. He nodded, understanding the pain she must have been feeling. After a while, Mrs. Manuel said it was time to go. Carol whispered, "Do we have to go, Mama?" But they left, and Elvis gave her a kiss on the forehead, promising to see her again. Elvis stayed a bit longer, lying in my lap, his eyes wide open. He was thinking about Carol, and the pain her mother must have been feeling. He talked about how Mrs. Manuel's eyes reminded him of his own mother's, and how they would open wide, like they were making a safe place for him. He said my eyes did the same thing, and that's when he knew I loved him. He kissed me, and we held each other until he fell asleep. I had to wake him up to send him on his way. We kissed good night, and he promised to see me in a few days. The next day, I was surprised by a call from my old friend, Buddy Conrad. He had been keeping up with me in the news, and wanted to take Pat and me for a ride in his new MG convertible. Buddy was a big Elvis fan, and he had a portable record player to play Elvis's songs. We pulled over on Highway 90, and he played Elvis's first LP, singing and mimicking Elvis's moves. It was a fun night, but it took a funny turn when we went to the amusement park. Buddy tried to win me a teddy bear like the one Elvis had, but he kept missing. Pat and I decided to ride the Ferris wheel. We were near the top when a little boy above us got sick. Vomit hit Pat in the back of the head, and she freaked out. We had to get her to the duck game, where she splashed water all over herself. The attendant was not happy, but we managed to clean her up. Buddy finally won a little stuffed tiger for Pat, and we headed home trying to avoid the stench. I promised Buddy I'd call him the next time Elvis came to town. Later that day, Elvis called, saying he was on his way to Biloxi. He asked me to wait for him, but I told him I'd be there in the morning. I called Buddy and told him to pick me up early. When he arrived, he was driving a stunning 1956 mint green Continental Mark II. I thought it would be fun to surprise Elvis with this car. "June, why don't you and Pat take the Mark II, and I'll drive out later in the Sarge's car?" Buddy suggested. He thought it was a great idea, and I agreed. We headed to Gulf Hills, excited to see what Elvis would think of the car. I had a feeling it would be a memorable moment. Elvis pulled into a service station to fill up the tank of gas we had burned on Buddy's new car. He reached into his pocket, only to realize he didn't have any money. "Sorry, Buddy, I'm out of cash," he said, looking a bit embarrassed. "Don't worry, EP, I've got you covered," Buddy said, pulling out a roll of bills from the glove compartment. It was a big roll, enough to choke a mule. We all laughed as he handed the money to Elvis. On the way back to the hack house, Buddy shouted, "Elvis, pull over. I need to get some firecrackers." Buddy, who wasn't into Roman candles, bought a large bag of every other kind. We had some left from our last battle, but Buddy's bag was full of new surprises. When we got back, the boys were dividing up candies on the floor, getting ready for another night of fun. "What a coincidence. Check this out, guys," Elvis said as Buddy dumped the bag on the floor. "Man, this is bootleg stuff." Red exclaimed, scooping up a handful of cherry bombs. "You can't find these in Tennessee. Too many kids have had their hands blown off." "They're not supposed to sell them to kids, Red. You're supposed to be a responsible person like me," Buddy replied, pretending to be a big kid. I didn't like fireworks much. The loud booms made me cover my ears. I said I wanted nothing to do with the dangerous cherry bombs. Buddy gathered them all and put them in the trunk of his car. He was in for a surprise, thinking Roman candles were just for girls. Elvis asked if he knew a good place to shoot off the fireworks. Buddy suggested the second seawall, a secluded area known for being a lover's paradise. He even mentioned it was where he had lost his cherry. The second seawall was mostly seawall, with a small patch of white sand. The woods were thick, so hiding behind a tree was out of the question. Instead of having our battle, we fired the Roman candles and bottle rockets out over the water. Elvis occasionally fired a Roman candle at Buddy, giving him a taste of our war and keeping him on his toes. The boys wanted to go back to Gulf Hills for a more secluded spot, but Elvis refused, saying his reputation was at stake. The gang piled into Buddy's car, leaving Elvis and me to ride alone. I expected Elvis to follow Buddy out, but he drove only a few yards before stopping. "How many times have you parked here, June?" he asked half-jokingly. I held up my fingers and started counting. "Let me see. There was Joe, John, Bobby, Bill, Frank." "Stop it, June. I'm serious. How many times?" "0 times, Elvis Presley, and I don't care if you believe me or not. Where's your favorite parking spot? Mud Island." "I'm just teasing, baby. I believe you." "Good, and besides, this is too far from home. We have lots of parking places closer to my house," I said, trying to sound serious but failing. "I love you, June Juanico," he said, laughing. "I love you even more, Elvis Presley." We made several wrong turns leaving the area, laughing at every dead end and double back. Later, we heard the gang was wondering if we were okay, debating whether to come back and check on us. Y'all got lost, didn't ya?" Buddy asked, nodding as we pulled into the driveway. "Nah, man, I never get lost. I almost lost my cherry, though," Elvis joked. As we drove past Biloxi Hospital, I remembered Mrs. Manuel's call. She had left a message saying Carol was admitted. We were always so busy I almost forgot. "Is there any way we can sneak in for a few minutes, just to say hello?" Elvis asked. "It's late, and visiting hours are over, but we can try." We parked by the emergency room entrance, and I went in to find Carol's room. All the doors were open in the pediatric wing. I found her room and ran back to the car to get Elvis. He opened the trunk, took out an album, and we tiptoed down the hall. Carol was having a blood transfusion and appeared to be sleeping. Her arm was strapped tightly to a board, cutting off the circulation to her tiny hand. She blinked when Elvis gently touched her fingers, but opened them wide when she realized who it was. "I knew you would come," she said in her weak little voice. Her eyes were glued to Elvis's face. She didn't even notice I was there. "I told you I would see you again," Elvis said, bending down and kissing her cheek. She smiled, closed her eyes, and fell asleep. Elvis put the album in the drawer of her nightstand, kissed her good night, and we tiptoed out of the room. "Look around and count your blessings, June," he whispered as we walked through the hospital halls. We drove down the beach in silence. Elvis pulled over in front of the White House Hotel and parked the car. "This is where I fell in love, June. Wanna go for a walk?" he asked, remembering our first evening together as he looked out at the long pier. Hand in hand, we walked to the end of the pier, talking about the night we met. Elvis was great with details, even reminding me that he never did get to go floundering. Standing behind me, with his arms around my waist, he lifted my hair and started kissing my neck. "Everything's the same as it was then, June. We're even looking at the same full moon." He was right. Everything was the same, even the chills I felt when he first kissed me. Elvis pretended to check the time by looking at his wrist. "I guess I'd better take you home, June. It's either 1:15 or 3:05, I can't tell." He was just kidding, it was still early. Early, that is, for Elvis's way of life. I had no objections when he drove past my street and headed for Ocean Springs. The boys had already turned in for the night, and the Hack house was dark. Without turning on the lights, we sneaked up the stairs to his balcony bedroom. Fully dressed, except for our shoes, we lay on the bed, snuggled in each other's arms, and fell asleep. Later, I sat straight up, panicking. "I have to go home." I was in a frenzy. "Relax, baby, it's early," Elvis said, pulling me back down. He looked at his glow in the dark travel clock on the bedside table. It was 1:30 in the morning, early for Elvis, but not for my mother. I dozed off, only to wake up 10 minutes later and sit up again. This went on for a while, and finally, Elvis agreed to take me home. We walked outside and looked up at the moon. "This night is too beautiful to waste. Wait here, I'll be right back." Elvis ran back inside. I was worried about my mother, but the night was too beautiful to waste. He came back with a blanket and spread it in the middle of the yard. Lying on the blanket next to Elvis, I forgot about my worries. "Keep your eyes on the moon, June, and let's spoon," he said, laughing. "Seriously, baby, keep your eyes on the moon, and you'll see a glowing blue ring appear." After staring at the moon for about 2 minutes, I could see the bright blue ring. It seemed to pulse with my heartbeat. I was fascinated, unable to speak. "Do you see it? Now, let yourself totally relax, and just focus on the space between the moon and the stars. Don't think about anything, just let yourself float. If you can relax enough, you can go right up there with him. Elvis was always playing tricks on me, but this time he sounded sincere. I tried to do exactly as he said. Feeling a little strange, I stopped looking at the moon and looked at Elvis. "How long have you been doing this?" I whispered. "Since I was a little boy," he whispered back, still looking at the moon. "You don't believe me, do you, June?" he asked, now looking at me. "I promise you, June, I'm serious. People think you're crazy if you talk about things they don't understand. My mama knows. She's the only one I know who really understands." He was acting strange, but he wasn't drinking or using drugs. At that time, the only pill Elvis ever took, other than an aspirin, was a no-dose tablet when he was on the road at night, and his strongest drink was a Coke. It was peaceful and quiet, except for the occasional "riv-it" from the bullfrogs near the bayou. I tried to relax as much as possible, and was about to fall asleep when Elvis's voice brought me back. The 3 long days Elvis was gone felt like an eternity. I missed him so much that I only felt better when I was sleeping. I tried to keep myself busy around the house, cooking and cleaning, but my mind kept wandering back to Elvis. My mother seemed happy to have me around, and it felt good to be useful. When Elvis finally returned, I couldn't wait to see him. I ran outside when I heard the familiar toot of his lavender Lincoln's horn, completely forgetting about my new haircut. Elvis gave me a big hug and then held me at arm's length, inspecting my hair. "When did you do that?" he asked, running his fingers through it. "Well," I replied, waiting for his opinion. "Well, what? What do you think?" "Think about what?" he asked, grinning. "About my hair." "It'll grow back, baby, don't worry," he said seriously, then kissed my pouting lips and laughed. "I'm only kidding, baby. I love it. You look exactly the same as you did the first night we met. I really do love it." Elvis had reserved horses for us at the riding stable. I quickly changed into long pants and grabbed a change of clothes. When we arrived, the gang was already there, and the same 2 horses we had ridden before were ready for us. Before we could leave, a car pulled up, and a man with a camera stepped out. He introduced himself and asked Elvis if he could take a few pictures and do a short interview. Elvis was impressed that someone asked for his permission. We stayed for a bit and then hit the trail. We felt like Roy Rogers and Dale Evans, singing and riding through the woods. Elvis told me he wouldn't have to leave again for 2 whole weeks. I was on top of the world. He called me Dale, and pretended we were fighting cattle rustlers. I tried to sound like Dale Evans, but I probably sounded more like a horse. We stretched the 45-minute ride to 90 minutes, and when we thought we were lost, a guide came to find us. We bumped into him as we were heading back to the stable. "That's enough action for today, gang. Let's go home and relax," Elvis said, patting his horse on the neck. When Elvis had free time, he was happy to do nothing for days, but I knew our time together was running out. He was excited about his Florida tour, but I was dreading it. As our time grew shorter, Elvis seemed less eager to leave. "I'm gonna miss you, baby. I hate to think about being away from you for so long," he said, holding me close. I didn't know exactly how long so long was, but it felt like forever. His Florida tour was 10 days, and after that, he had to go to Hollywood for his first movie. "I'll miss you too, Elvis. I don't know what I'll do without you," I said, close to tears. "If I could figure out a way to hide you from Colonel Parker, you could go with me. Let me see what I can work out. Do you think your mother would let you go?" he asked, thinking out loud. "Me, go to Florida with you? I'd love to, but I doubt my mother would let me," I replied, not sure if it was even possible. Elvis held me tighter, and I could feel his heart beating fast. We both knew the future was uncertain, but for now we had each other, and that was enough.